Now let's talk about how we can create API endpoints in our Next.js application. So as we know that we can create a full stack application directly using Next.js. No need to create a separate project for our API endpoints. Okay, so I'll teach you how we can create APIs in our Next.js. So let's say first you need to go to your app directory, and inside that app directory create a folder called API or whatever you want. So whatever name we will give to this folder, it's going to be included in our API endpoint route. So it's better to follow the naming convention. It's pretty general naming convention we follow while we create a API endpoint. Okay, so after that, inside this API folder you need to create another folder which signifies what APIs you are creating, right? So let's say I want to create APIs for interacting with my user data. Okay, let's say so you can name this folder as users. Okay, now the API route is creating something. I created something like this: API/users. Okay, so this is the route for getting all the users details. Okay, now so since we have created the folder, now inside this users folder we have to create a file. So as we know that when we create a page in Next.js app, we name it as page.tsx inside any folder we create, right? So since this is a API route, we need to name it as route.tsx. So it's important thing to understand that whenever you create a folder in your Next.js app, inside the app directory, it will look for a particular file. Like if you create it as page.tsx, then it would be served, or otherwise it will look for a route.tsx file. Okay, so we use route.tsx file for creating our API endpoints. Okay. So now we can create our API endpoint for returning user data for get endpoint. Okay, so it's very easy. You have to write it something like this. Let's say export function, and it's going to be a get method, and inside this get method we have to pass a request parameter which will contain all our request details. Okay, and this request parameter will be going to be of type next request. Okay, and that next request we can import it from next server. Okay, and inside this get method we can return our response like this: next response. Again, this is also going to be imported from next server. Just hit enter, and we can return a JSON like this: message, and okay, and whatever message we want to return to the client. Okay, that's it. Our get endpoint is created. Okay, let me show you how we can access it. Okay, after your localhost 3000, you can just type it API/users, and this will call the users get endpoint. As you can see, we are able to see the message directly on the browser. Main HTTP verbs we are going to work with are get, post, put, and delete. So as you know, this is used to fetch all the records, or this is used to retrieve the data. And post we generally use to post data on the server. Like whenever we want to create a new record, we can make use of HTTP post. And put we use in case of updating a particular record on the server, and delete is for, as the name signifies, deleting the records. Okay, I showed you that how we can access a get endpoint in the browser directly, since in the get endpoint we don't have to pass anything inside a body. But when we work with post or put endpoint, we generally have a body where we pass all the form data, and that data will be accessed in the API endpoint and will be saved into the database. Okay, so we can't do that directly in the browser. So for that I'm going to use a tool called Postman. So you can download it directly from the website postman.com. So it's a free tool. You can just download it directly. I've already downloaded it. Let me show you how. Just after the installation, open the Postman, and this is how it looks. So let's say I want to access, I want to invoke a particular endpoint using Postman. Let's say I want to get the data in the Postman. Okay, let's say so first uh, we have to tell that what kind of request we are making. So since this is a get endpoint, we can select get. Otherwise, if it is a post endpoint we are calling, we can select post or put or patch or delete, like that. Okay, so since we this is a get endpoint, we can select get, and after that you can enter the URL of your endpoint. Okay, this is the URL of our endpoint. Okay, and since we don't have to pass anything, we can just directly hit on click on send button. Okay, now you can see it's sending the request, and okay, the status is 200. We got the response from the server. This is the response we got. Okay, and this is the response exactly we returned from the API endpoint. Okay, let me show you how we can create a post endpoint now. Okay, now let's see how we can make use of post endpoint. Okay, let me just correct the data here. Instead of sending this static message, let me return the result, more realistic result. Like in a real world scenario, there's going to be ID and a name of a user, right? So let's say I'm going to call it John Doe. Okay, and since this endpoint is going to return a list of users, I can just simply wrap it inside the square bracket just to signify that this is a list of users, and I can return another user. Name, it can be Jane Doe. Okay, okay, now if I call this endpoint, I'll be getting these two records. Okay, as you can see, I have got two results now. One is John Doe, second one is the Jane Doe. Okay, now we want to create a record on the server. So for that we will be creating a post endpoint. Okay, so same naming convention we need to follow for uh, creating a post endpoint. We will be writing it like this, and again we have to pass a request parameter, so it would be like this, and after that we can read our body content like const body equal to request dot json. This is how we can get the body. So for now, since we have not integrated any database in our application, so I can't save this record directly in the database. I'm going to simply return the whatever response whatever parameter, whatever data I'm getting in the body, I'll simply return this in the response. Okay, so let's see if our post endpoint is working or not. So now create a new tab, open a new tab, select post, and copy paste the end URL. Okay, since the URL is same for post, it's just that the HTTP verb is different, and for sending the response to the server, we can select raw, and since we want to send it in JSON format, we can simply select JSON, and I can send the response like send the request data, something like this, and we have a name parameter, and name can be anything, so like John Doe again. Okay, now if I click on send, I'll be seeing the same response in the API response as well. Okay, okay, I think there is some error. Let me check. Okay, let me log the body here. let's see what exactly are we getting in the body and why it is not returning the response. Now if I click on send and if I check, okay, since okay, I got the error. So since this request.json is returning a promise, can you see it's returning a promise, so we have to await it since it's returning a promise. And when now we have decorated this with await keyword. Since we have written this await keyword, we have to decorate our method with async keyword. Okay, now if I click on my send button again, I should be able to see the response. Okay, as you can see, now we are getting the response back. Okay, it is as simple as that. Now let's create an endpoint for getting a single record. Okay, so since this endpoint is used for getting all the records from the database or from the server, we can't use it, because in a real world our endpoint would look something like this. For getting the records, our endpoint will look something like this. Like we will be passing a particular ID in the URL, and then we, on the basis of that ID, we will be getting the record, right? So since the endpoint which we created is, we are not passing any parameter in that, it's simply for getting all the records from the database. So now we will create a new API endpoint for getting a particular object. Okay, now let's create that. So earlier I showed you that in case whenever we have uh, uh, whenever we have a route parameter in a route, so we create a folder like this, that this is the folder signifies that what is the parameter name, and inside that what page are we going to serve to the browser, right? So in this scenario we can follow the same naming convention. So again, go to the users folder and create a folder called ID, since we will be passing a ID in the parameter. And inside this ID folder we can create a file route.tsx, and this route.tsx file will be responsible for handling the get user by ID endpoint. Okay, so now we can create our get endpoint for fetching up single object. So we can we can follow the same naming convention like this, and we have to pass a request parameter, okay, for fetching the request. And apart from having a request parameter, we need to have another parameter for getting the route parameter from the route, right? So this route parameter is available in the params object. Okay, we can pass it like this, params, and again we can destructure it. Like we know that it params contain our ID parameter, we can write it like this, and this params is of type params, and this params have a ID which is of type number, right? So don't get confused with the overall syntax. I'll simplify it, no issue, like this. So we can return the next response ID. We can return the same ID which we are getting in the route parameter, and the name John Doe. Good. Now if I go to the postman and make this get request again, I should be able to see the response. Okay, now as you can see, we are getting the whatever ID we are passing, we are getting that. Let me pass some different ID. Okay, and click on send. As you can see, ID is getting updated, and since we have hard coded this name, we are getting the same name again. Okay, let me simplify this syntax. So instead of writing this, we can create an interface and name it as whatever name you want to give it. I would say route param. Okay, and we know that inside that we have a params, and and that params contain id, and id is of type number, and this is the type we have declared for our second parameter. And now instead of writing this, we can define a type here. Okay, I guess it should be simpler. Okay, now if you are overwhelmed with this, all with the whole destructuring thing, you can, instead of writing this, you can just write params. Okay, and now you can get the id from params and dot id. Okay, this will give you the same response. It's just that the way of writing, how you are getting the values out of your parameters, right? So let me show you if this is working or not. Okay, as you can see, we are still getting the same response, so our get endpoint is working. Now let me show you how we can update a particular record. So for this, we can create another method, and that method needs to be created inside this id folder, since our put endpoint route would be similar as get endpoint. Since for updating a record, we will be passing a id in the url for updating that particular record, right? So as you can see, we will be creating another put method inside this same file. Okay, let me create this method, export function put, and this method is going to be put, and we will we'll have a request parameter, and this is going to be of type next request, and params, again we can make use of the above interface we made. So I'll write it like this, and inside this, first we need to read the body, since we will be passing all the data which needs to be updated in the request body. So we can write it like this, and after that we can return our response, next response we need to return, and that response will be in JSON, and we can pass the response like this. And okay, since we haven't declared the type for our body, we can create an interface for defining the types for our body. Let me just define the body params, or we can simply write it body. And I know that there is going to be only name I'll be passing in the body, so we can just write it like this, and we can define the body here, that this is the type of our body. And okay, we need to since again I'm making the same mistake, since whenever we call this request.json, this is returning a promise, so we need to await it. And when we use await keyword, we need to decorate our method with the async keyword. Okay, so we are getting, now we are not seeing any error, and we are simply getting okay the result. Okay, let me let's try out this method. Okay, again copy this URL and paste it here, and this is a put endpoint. Select put here, and again in the body we need to pass the parameters inside the body in a JSON format. So and I'll be updating the name, so I can pass anything I want, then that same thing will be returned in the response. So let's say test user. Okay, and the ID is I am passing in the URL, and when I click on the send button, so I'll be seeing the response. ID is 10, and I'm seeing the response which I passed. Now let's create a delete endpoint. Okay, so in the delete endpoint as well, we will be passing a ID in the URL. So let me create an endpoint here in the same file where we have this get by ID and put method. Okay, and this is going to be a delete method this time, and then we have to okay, and we don't need to access the request parameter. Let me just remove this one. We only need to read the route parameter, so we can write it like this. Okay, and we can simply return a next response.json, and since we are deleting the particular record, I can simply return a success message that the user has been deleted, like this. Okay, so let me go to the this postman and create a delete method. Okay, copy the URL and paste it here, and if we click on send, we should be seeing the success message that okay, there is some error. Let me check what exactly is the error. Next is response params dot params dot id is deleted. Why are we seeing this? Okay, I deleted this. We need to have the request parameters being passed in this. This is the this is the syntax we need to follow when whenever we create an endpoint. We need to have this request parameter in the method signature. Okay, otherwise your method will not work. Okay, now if I click on send button, I should be seeing the success message, user 10 deleted. Okay, now let me show you how we can put some validations inside our endpoints, and how we can return different status codes to the user, right? Let's say in a real world example, we know that whenever we create a record or whenever we insert a record in the database, it checks for certain field like this. Like in our case, I know that I only have ID and name field. So if the user is not passing name in the body, I should be returning the user as a failure message that the validation failed. You need to pass name in the body, right? So let me remove this, and once we got the body, let me parse it, or let me just check that if the body have the name parameter or not. If it does not have name, then I'll be returning the response like this, next response dot json, and I can say that there is an error stating that name is required. Okay, and to pass the status code, I can simply pass it in the like this, just as a second parameter in the .json method. So I can just pass the status code here. So whatever status code we want to pass, we can send it like this. So in this case, I want to say that if the name does not exist, I'll be throwing the error, and it will show the status code as 400. Okay, let's test this post message. Okay, we created the post endpoint here. Okay, in our scenario, okay, I have not put any validation on the ID field, because in a real world we do not ask for ID to the user. It gets automatically created on the server. So for now, I have just passed this ID here. Otherwise, we don't need to pass the ID here. Okay, for now, let's just say I'm not passing the name. Okay, I have simply deleted this, and let me click on the send button now. So I should be seeing the error that the validation field. Okay, as you can see, we got this response that name is required, and the status code this time is 400. Okay, now let me put the name field again. Okay, it needs to be in double quotes, and now if I call my endpoint, I should be seeing the success message, and the status code is 200 this time. Okay, but when we create a record on the server, the status code is 201, not 200. So let me change the status code for post. Okay, let's say I want to say that this time the status code will be 201. Okay, now if I call my endpoint, you'll see that we'll get the correct status code 201 created. Okay. Now let's see how we can validate our request using a library called Zod. Okay, so instead of validating the request parameters like this one by one, we can make use of a library Zod. So this library we can install it in our project, and that we can make use to validate our overall request object coming in the body, and we can it will throw the error. Okay, let me show you how what response it will return. Okay, so this is how we can make use of this Zod library in the project. We just need to import it and define the schema, and we can pass the uh, object, and it will throw the error if that passed object is not of the required type or not. Okay, so let me show you how we can install this in the project. Let me stop my project and first install npm I Zod. Okay, so this will install the Zod library in our Next.js project, and after that we can import it in our particular file where we want to validate our schema. Okay, let's say I want to validate my post, the schema which is coming in this post endpoint. Okay, first import the Zod from like this. So as we seen in the npm.js website, that we have to write it like this. Okay, import Zod from Zod. Okay, no, it will be like this. For the syntax, okay, we have to import it like this. Okay, now after that we can create a schema. We know that we have a schema for like this. We can create our user schema. So we can create a user schema like this. We have a field called name in our case. This is a type of a string. Okay, and okay, let's keep only one string and see how we can add one or more strings later. Okay,
Yeah, so this is the method I've checked the documentation. This is the method we will be using, safe parse. Okay, so this method will return the error object, and inside that error object we will be getting this errors array, which will contain all the errors related to our schema. And if if there is a validation result is not success, then we will be throwing the error list of all errors to the user with a status code of 400. Okay, now let's just test this out. Okay, let me remove this log from here, and okay, now if we go to the postman, and if I remove the name from here and send the request, I should be seeing the errors here. Okay, as you can see, this returns a error array, and there is only single error is coming here. It's saying that it's too small, value is too small, since we have put a validation that it should at least contain 3 characters. Okay, and there is a message, error message as well. A string must contain at least 3 characters. So it's pretty nice way or easy way to put validations or validating your request body through this library.